zidni ilma, Rabbi zidni ilma, Rabbi zidni ilma. So, inshallah, today I've been given the task of talking about social manners in Islam. And I think actually this is is a very important aspect to our lives as Muslims following Islamic guidance, because we, in work, even within our families, we interact with so many people on a daily basis that we need to understand the etiquettes of socialism, or the etiquettes sorry, of social, being social, engaging with people, and different types of people for that matter as well. So everything we're going to really talk about today is going to be applicable to Muslims, but also your social relationships with non-Muslims, and actually anybody, if for that matter. So we're going to be covering a lot today. We're going to be covering the Islamic greeting, the etiquettes of visiting people, eating together, etiquettes of gathering, etiquette of speech, and etiquettes of being a good neighbor. So hopefully this should take us down to for at least the next hour, inshallah. Well, I don't know, maybe even less, possibly, depending on if anyone has anything to contribute, so on and so forth. So let's get started with the first subcategory, which is greeting. So when we greet others, now this is obviously quite a self-explanatory concept. I mean, you greet somebody by saying hello, hi. In Islamic terms, we say assalamu alaikum. But what we need to remember is that when we're giving salam, and this is obviously to a Muslim person, we give the same greeting or better. So if somebody says assalamu alaikum to you, we respond with, or the better etiquette would be to respond by saying assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Or if somebody has told you assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, then we go the one step further and say wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. So it's always, match the same level of greeting or even better. But we need to also understand the culture we are living in, right? So for example, over here, for instance, we shake hands, right? And in many cultures, they might shake hands. So if you're greeting somebody, it might be culturally appropriate to shake their hand. In other cultures, and I know this, for instance, in the Middle Eastern culture, especially between women to women and men to men, of course, they would kiss on the cheek 3 times. In Qatari culture, because that's where I grew up, the men actually touch each other's noses, nose to nose, right? They would give salam and then they would do nose to nose. In certain Far Eastern countries, they actually take the hand of the person they're speaking to and put it up to their forehead. So, the greeting differs depending on the culture we are living in. And we need to be aware of that as well. So if you are living, because sometimes this may be seen as disrespect. Yeah, so obviously we need to be culturally aware, socially aware of where we are as well, okay? Not to disrespect anybody with our greeting. Abu Hurairah reported Allah's Messenger said, the rider should first meet the pedestrian, and the pedestrian the one who is seated, and a small group should greet a larger group with assalamu alaikum. So this kind of encompasses. So if you're in a situation where there's 2 people who have come across each other, depending on the circumstances, who has the right of salam, or we know that it doesn't matter who gives salam first. But this is sort of the rubric of what we should do. So the rider should greet the pedestrian. So in our terms, if someone's in a car, they should possibly say salam to the person who is walking, okay? And the person who is walking to the one who is seated. So if the person who is walking goes up to a bunch of friends who are sitting on a bench, they would go and say salam to the people who are sat on the bench. And a small group should greet a larger group. So if you're gone to a picnic and there's a small group of you as friends going to join a larger group, the small group should greet the larger group first with the salam. Okay? So those are a few of the etiquettes. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can learn from in various books of hadith as well about greeting others, but we don't obviously have the time for that. So we're going to go through some of what I felt were probably the most important, but also the most, applicable greeting and etiquettes that we can apply in our society and, given the circumstances we live in at the moment. So let's move on to the next one, visiting others, because this kind of ties in with this greeting when we greet them. So visiting others, we're not necessarily talking about the sick There are specific etiquettes about the sick, and actually the ones that I'm going to be talking about can relate to those who are unwell as well. But just in general terms, when you go to visit somebody, visit your friend, visit family, visit relatives, this is sort of the etiquettes that we would follow. So, firstly, all you have believed, do not enter houses other than your own houses until you assert and welcome and greet their inhabitants. That is best for you. Perhaps you'll be reminded. Now, Surah Nur and Surah Hujurat both go in detail about the etiquettes of visiting people. And just on a side note, I'll tell you that in Surah Hujurat, we learn about the etiquette of actually knocking on people's doors, okay? And how we should wait for them to respond. And this was on the backbone of the Prophet ﷺ, because what used to happen is, especially the Prophet ﷺ being a person of superiority and someone with knowledge, a lot of people, and especially the Bedouins, now the Bedouins of Arabia were often considered those who didn't necessarily have many etiquettes. They're slightly different to those from the city. Okay, they had a slightly different mindset. So what they would do is they would often just walk into the Prophet's house, like without warning, right? No sense of privacy. They have a question, they would walk right into the Prophet's house. And sometimes they would even shout to the Prophet from outside his home. And then the verses in Surah Hujurat were revealed to tell them to wait outside until the Prophet has invited you in, and not to visit the Prophet at odd hours of the day where he's resting or he's with his wives. So that tells us that there is a huge importance about the people, who's the people that we are expected to visit and the people that we are visiting, right? So even in Surah Nur, we have here, Allah is telling us, don't enter houses other than your houses until you're essentially welcome, right? Until you're invited, right? And then greet their inhabitants and the people that live there, yeah? And also in Surah Nur, also, I'm not sure if I mentioned it here, no, but also as an extension to this particular ayah, Allah also advises us about actually knocking on people's doors, right, and waiting for them, knocking on their doors 3 times, and if they do not answer, then we turn away. We don't just stand there hoping and waiting and then reminding people or reminding the inhabitants of that home that, oh, I came to visit you and you weren't in. You just respect the fact that there is nobody at home or you are not wanted at this time, and you leave and you try again another time. So what do we learn from these multiple ayahs which have spoken about the importance of visiting and the etiquettes of visiting? So enter a home once sought prior permission, and often we do that anyway. It's very unlikely that we, especially living here, it's very unlikely that we just walk in. Whereas, for example, in some cultures, like in Pakistan, India, maybe Bangladesh, in some Arab cultures as well, there is a common culture of people where they just kind of walk into, especially actually even the American culture, you kind of just walk into the houses, right? As in without any prior permission, you're gonna go visit relatives, you just go to the house and walk through. But Allah is telling us that actually at least message, or at least tell the other person that you are intending to visit at so and so time, and then receive their permission and then go through. Okay. Visit at a convenient time for the host. So, for instance, we all know that over here, maybe around 6, 7 o'clock, a lot of people are having dinner, they're having tea. You don't want to meet, or you don't want to suddenly turn up the house at meal times, or we know very late at night when people have got work the next day. You don't want to be visiting at night or at bedtime without obviously permission from the host prior. Obviously, when we go to people's houses, we have to respect the rights of privacy. And this doesn't just mean, don't go into the host's bedroom, but that also means like don't go anywhere in the house without actually informing the host. So for instance, if you need to use the bathroom, ask politely, where's the bathroom? Can I use the bathroom, please? Or if you need a place to pray, ask the host and be like, I would like to pray. Is there anywhere appropriate that I can pray? And what also this means is don't and look around unnecessarily. I mean, if there are things there that catch your interest, of course, some things are there as like a conversation starters in people's houses. So for instance, in our living room downstairs, we've got a bunch of pictures on the walls and things like this, so that there's, people can kind of marvel at them, have a look at them, and they can also serve as conversation starters. But obviously, if there are, for instance, pictures of families and pictures of people that are on the mantelpiece, which a lot of families have, try not to like pre on them and stare down at them and go, so start opening cupboards and looking at their books and things like this. Sometimes that is not wanted, so obviously respect the rights of their privacy, even if it is in their communal space. um and the other thing that I think we're pretty good at, and especially the Muslim community is pretty good at, is serving food when people visit. Okay, so, and it is actually recommended that if the host serves food, eat from that, eat from what the host serves, right? And again, that is, that's an honor for the host. And choose appropriate conversation topics. So you don't want to choose topics that will embarrass the host, or conversation topics that belittle the host, right? So appropriate conversation topics, especially those that, center around maybe the remembrance of Allah. Obviously, those are the best sorts of topics, but we choose appropriate conversations to have. Okay, we're not going to go there to bully somebody. We're not going there to look backbite or look down at somebody. We're there to have an appropriate conversation. So these are sort of the things that we know that when it comes to visiting others, things that we can apply in, in our daily lives. And this is not restricted to the home. This could even be if you're visiting somebody in their office or at work, right? You're going to the office. And often we do all these things, right? So we seek prior permission before visiting or going to your boss's office, for instance. Email them asking for a convenient time to have a meeting. You obviously respect their privacy. You don't go in through looking through your boss's laptop or work notes. And if your boss sometimes serves you a cup of tea, then yeah, sometimes you have a cup of tea with them, and we have an appropriate conversation topic. So you can see that these things are actually applicable, not just with just the people that we are visiting, but actually in a lot of the work related aspects as well. So this brings us to, on the topic of food, this brings us to the next topic of eating together. And actually we know this because food is almost like the fundamental thing that brings us together, right? Food is literally like, if there's no food, I think most people would be lost on what to do. So when we share experiences, beyond basic interactions, okay, we create bonds. So when, a lot of the time our interactions are very hello, hi, shake their hands, hug, right? But if we have experiences beyond that, so for instance, we go out for an activity, we have a party, we have a lot of guests over, we create lasting relationships, okay? Because you foster you find something that you share with them, you find a commonality between you. And we know that in Islam, especially in our religion, there is a huge culture of congregation, and it's a central theme in our lifestyle, right? And when we eat together, this just reinforces this idea of congregation, right? And even if you're in silence, if you're eating together as a family on the dinner table, you're automatically engaged in the sharing process of food. So a lot of you with families would know that if you're sat together at the dinner table, sometimes it's all completely silent. But someone somewhere at some point will, or your husband or your kids, someone will say, "Oh, mum," or some really lovely food. Thank you for cooking it, for instance. But you are sharing over food, right? You are sharing experiences over the dinner table. And so the food itself becomes a connecting factor. So when you eat together, there are etiquettes, but it's wonderful to know that, we are often social over food. So we have to ensure that our company is good, right? Because you know that you can, especially those of us who work, but even if you don't, you would know that there is good company and bad company, especially when people are going for food, right? And you also know you've got bad companies such as going to nightclubs or bars or pubs where that is not the correct etiquette when you're eating together. You would not, as a Muslim, go to those places. There are no impermissible aspects to the gathering, for instance, alcohol. Now, this is I'm not going to go into fiqh here, but for instance, if you are going on behalf of a work dinner, for instance, where there is alcohol involved, you would obviously want to maybe rethink about whether or not you want to attend that gathering. Now, a lot of the time, some work-related events are unavoidable. Some of them are almost necessary for you to go to, which is obviously completely understandable. But obviously, you are going to do your best to refrain from being in the presence of alcohol. Be considerate of others when eating, right? So, don't, I understand some men eat, like men eat a lot, like men eat more than women, I think. I know, in our family we do. But for instance, if you can see in your table that there is only a few, let's just talk about gravy. There's a little bit of gravy left. You're not going to hog all the gravy. You're going to be delicate about it. You're going to be discreet about it and take enough so that there's enough for others to take as well, right? So you have to be considerate of others when eating as well. Don't hog all the food. Do not take all the food at once. And don't do anything off-putting on the dinner table. So, we're not going to do, you're not going to make inappropriate jokes or do something which is going to put people off on the dinner table. And, the most basic that we can do when we're eating together is thank the person who has cooked and served the food. And even if this is your mother, your relative, it's good etiquette to thank the person who has cooked and served the food. And actually, you can see here that a lot of the time, all of these Islamic manners over here it's actually just courtesy. It's actually just courtesy. No one is going to do this on the dinner table. Nobody's going to do anything off-putting on the dinner table. And we know that sitting on the dinner table is quite a formal interaction. So we have to be on our best behavior, often phones off tables, etc. So you can see that the Islamic mannerisms of certain things are actually very coinciding the culture that we live in, and in British culture, for instance, right? So, alhamdulillah, what Islam teaches us is really just common sense, in my opinion, because you would do these things when you're eating together anyway. So that leads us on to the next one of gathering and congregation. So when we are gathering together, again, remember we talked about in the couple of slides earlier that congregation is a very large part of our culture, of Islamic culture and our lifestyle. We try and do a lot in congregation and gatherings. So there's a huge emphasis on gatherings. So what are some of the etiquettes here? So we give salam when we enter and exit a gathering space. So if there's a class or a session ongoing, you would give salam when you enter, and you would also give salam as you are leaving as well. Make room for newcomers. So when you're in a space, you've come to a session, or you've come to the masjid, or you've come to any gathering for that matter, you would kind of shuffle. If you're already sitting there, make room for the newcomers that come in. And this is for the person who comes to the space. Don't ask others to give you their space, right? So obviously, if you're an elderly and you come in, you would expect people to give you their space. But do not see a reason to. You're pregnant, you can't sit on the floor, or you need special seating arrangements. Do not ask others to give you their space. In the presence of 3 people, 2 of them should not engage in private conversation. Because obviously you are, shaitan comes in between. Shaitan comes in between.
Assalamu alaikum.
Sorry?
Hello? Your voice is like getting cut. Your voice is coming and going, like kind of it's getting cut, the network.
Is it? Oh.
Yeah.
No. All right, hold on a second. Just give me a second. Let me see if I can do something about the Wi-Fi. I think it might be because, is it? Okay, what if
it's not too bad. It's not too bad, but it's just a little bit here and there.
Okay, right. I'll just try and be as close to the computer screen as possible. Give me a second, sorry. Guys, if you just give me just a second, my childcare.
Sure, no problem. Take your time, yeah.
That's sorry about that, guys. Sorry about that, guys. My kids love to come in through when we've got a class going on. Give me. Okay. Where are we? Okay, so right. Don't ask others to give you their space. Right. So yeah, so we talked about this as well. So and leave the gathering space as clean as when you found it. And often, sometimes, unfortunately, I have to say the Muslim community don't always necessarily be very good at this, but it is an etiquette we need to be very mindful of, is that whenever we leave any space, remember we need to bear in mind that the space that we have been to gather to the space that we have been given to gather for the sake of Allah is also a sacred space. So we need to clean it, and it's also been gifted to us or lent to us by people who own that space. So we need to be mindful about clean, keeping it pure, and as basic etiquette presents itself, leave somewhere as you found it, right? So we need to get into the habit. Often, unfortunately, when you go to you find that there's a lot of mess that's left over, especially where there's a huge crowd, lots of mess, people are cleaning up after you. But as on an individual basis, what we can do is we can clean up after ourselves. And I think that's a very important part of gathering together. I'm gonna just pause here for a second and just ask, are there any questions? Is there anyone that wants to add anything? Is there anything that anyone would like to talk about? Someone wrote something on the chat. Okay, no, that was nothing. Anything anyone would like to say or add to what I've mentioned so far? Nope. Okay, we'll continue, inshallah. Right. Okay, so now the etiquettes of speech. Now, the etiquettes of speech are...
I think we have one person.
Oh, do we go? Then
Huma, yeah.
Yeah, go
Sister Huma pointed out cleaning after we do wudu in public space.
Oh, that's a yeah, that's a really, I don't know why I couldn't see that message. Anyway, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important one, because when we go to masjids and it seems like there's been a flood here because someone's made wudu. So absolutely, I think that's really, and it's unfortunate because not everybody has the time in day to clean up after you. And yes, we've got cleaners in a lot of these places, but we shouldn't really be leaving it up to the cleaners. What if it was missed? What if they don't clean it up? So I think that's really important, especially this whole idea of public bathrooms, wherever we go, just keeping ourselves clean. We know that tahara is half of our faith. So why do we wait for somebody else to do our dirty work for us? But that's a really, really good point. Jazakallah khair. Now let's move on to the etiquette of speech. So the etiquettes of speech, and you can see all of these elements are kind of tying into one another, because you've got, we're talking about visiting others, hosts, guests, food, speech, all of these things tie into one another, tying together, right? And these social aspects are so important in our lives as Muslims, especially, right? Because humans are social beings. We cannot seclude ourselves. We often, I'd be surprised if there's somebody here who doesn't go out much. We all go out, even if it's to the shops. There is this element of being outside and engaging with other people, even people we don't know, on a daily basis. And it's important that we reflect the good social manners of a Muslim. You already know we're getting a lot of bad press these days. And the Prophet ﷺ was a walking, talking Quran. Why? Because his character and his manners, his public manners, private manners, were absolutely exquisite. People used to convert to Islam just based off the interaction he had with others. And we should try and reach that level of good mannerisms in our lives. And not just because we're Muslims, but because that's what makes us a good human. Right? Nobody likes, this is what I always say about British people in general, is that we are the most moodiest, the most stuck up and arrogant people you can probably find. You go to America, for instance, I was just there last week visiting family, and they are so friendly and they are so engaging, and they're always asking how you're doing. And, the whole atmosphere is very different. And I think we need to really remember culture dictates one thing, because we're all very conservative, I think, as a culture, as a British culture we are. But at the same time, I think we need to come out of that shell and remind ourselves that we're Muslims first and foremost. And what does our Muslim mannerism say about us? What does Allah tell us to be like as a Muslim? And it's certainly not, do not be friendly and do not shake hands with people and do not, greet people. It's not like that at all, right? So moving on, let's look at the etiquette in that regard then when we talk to people. Now, those of you guys who have been on the tube or like on the way to work on buses would know that nobody wants to have a conversation at 9 o'clock in the morning. And that is granted. And nobody also wants a conversation at 5 o'clock in the evening after a long day of work. But maybe this thing might be able to change your perspective on how we can, be more polite, be more engaging with people who want to come and speak to us. So, firstly, speak only if our speech will be good or beneficial. So, cracking a joke here and there is no problem. But obviously, our main aim is to, we don't want to speak nonsense. We don't want to speak something that is ill-informed. Speak that which is good. Be truthful when speaking. I think a lot of people, especially in Asian culture, Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi culture, maybe what some women do, especially the women, I would think, is that they exaggerate a lot, right? But be truthful in that exaggeration, right? And don't tell lies when you are talking, right? Refrain from using bad language. I hope none of us do that anyway. Refrain from backbiting, of course. The purpose of your conversation should not be to talk about somebody else. Do not take Allah's names as oath. And this is a one because often, especially with the young generation, I think the teenagers, those going to school, etc., they often start waving around wallahi everywhere. So anything that happens, wallahi, I didn't tell the teacher, or wallahi, I didn't do this, and wallahi, I didn't do that, and wallahi, this happened, and wallahi, that happened, or I swear to God, or I swear on my mom, and all this kind of these oaths that they throw around. We shouldn't be taking an oath on Allah so lightly to be using it in every sentence. And this is something we can teach our children as well. And if you do it yourself, something that we can teach ourselves. Don't you only take oath on Allah's name in absolutely extreme circumstances, but we should not be sort of throwing it around so baselessly, right? On very, very small, trivial things in our conversation. Right? Some people have the habit of doing that, but unfortunately, that's not the correct habit to have. We should not be saying things like wallahi after everything because it diminishes the importance of Allah's oath. Speak about that which we have knowledge. And actually, this is a second really important point here because with the rise of social media and the rise of these Instagram influencers and TikTok, YouTube, people have suddenly self-certified themselves as experts on topics they actually don't know much about by watching a 5-minute reel or a 5-minute video or a 5-minute YouTube. Remember, you do not become an expert at something by watching a 5-minute recap video of a topic. We need to, be in a constant state of learning by reading books, by reading genuine articles and watching videos which have a lot of purpose. But even then, that does not make us a personal knowledge on that topic. Yes, you might have some knowledge. People are going away reading like you watch a 3-minute reel on Instagram and thinking that they know everything. Please be wary of people and ourselves. If we are doing this, you can relay that information, the small amount of information you have gathered from that video, but that certainly does not make us an expert on it. Okay. And as a result of that, we can really pass on misinformation. So we need to be very, very mindful of what we are watching, number one, but also the information we are taking from that and how we are conveying that information to others. A good example of that is during COVID. If you remember, there were so many WhatsApp videos, so many WhatsApp messages going around spreading misinformation from people who self-acclaimed to be experts on, I don't know, the vaccines and how the virus is spreading, etc. Please be mindful of that. And on the backbone of that, we need to remember to investigate information before conveying it to others, right? So that is also an etiquette of speech. So, this ayah is actually in Surah Hujurat, where we need to be mindful of the information that is coming to us. And if you are the person that gets a video that is on forward and then forwards it to every single person on their contact list, you need to first consider number one, why are you doing that? Number two, is this information true? And secondly, what is the purpose of this, right? Do not do that if that is going to be impeding on somebody that is like an expert when you really are not. Okay, so please be mindful of that. And do not engage in senseless argument, especially those that make others feel inferior. And again, I'm going to refer to social media here because you have a lot of those keyboard warriors that are on social media who love to pick an argument just for the sake. There is no base. There's literally no base to this argument. They just want to engage in, like in a disagreement for no good reason. So, don't engage yourself in people who are not willing to listen and are not willing to agree to disagree. Some people are just in it to have the last word. So, and they're there as basically social media bullies. So again, one to tell our kids, one to be mindful of as well. Um, and finally, we're going to talk about how to be good. Yeah, later on, and I'll add that in just a second. So the last subheading of this is how to be good to our neighbors, and then our neighbors. You wouldn't think this, but our neighbors have a huge right in Islam, right? So if you don't know who your neighbors are, I would recommend by the end of this week go and find out who your neighbors are and introduce yourselves to them because they have a huge, huge right in our community, in our lives as Muslims. So, we as neighbors are a sense of security and safety for our neighbors. How many of you have often left your house keys with your neighbors when you've been away, right? And or have just let them know that you are going away just to keep an eye on the house, for instance, right? Um, so we are a sense of security and safety for them. Yeah. They have a right in our lives as Muslims. I already said that, and we should greet them and ask about them. So if you see them over the fence in your garden or out in the porch, ask about them, ask how they're doing, ask them if they need anything. And I think there was a really great sense of community during COVID again, where everyone was looking out for each other, neighbors were looking out for each other because it was such a turmoil time. And I think we need to actually bring that back, and we need to, we need to be mindful of our neighbors. We need to be good to our neighbors. We need to ask them how they're getting on. We need to ask them if, they need anything. Visit them when sick or afflicted with calamity, especially more so, if you know that they're unwell, giving food to our neighbors, passing that on to them, about some chocolates, just anything, just asking if they need any help from us. To share moments of happiness and grief with our neighbors as well, inviting them to our celebrations of happiness, but also inviting them to our moments of grief and alerting them to our moments of grief when there's a death in the family, and let them be a part of that as well, right? Because that is how we all look out for each other. Do not infringe on their privacy or make things difficult for them. And there's a good example where the Prophet ﷺ, there was a woman who used to throw rubbish at the Prophet ﷺ. So do not make things difficult for our neighbors. Don't, unfortunately, there are our neighbors, like non-Muslim neighbors, who are not good to us. Okay. And I completely know that not everyone is lucky to have good neighbors, and that's absolutely normal. And this is absolutely okay. But we need to do our part as good neighbors. Just because somebody next door is not being very nice to us, that doesn't hold us back from being nice to them. So if you made some food or if you made cookies or biscuits or cake, just passing them over next door. Eventually, I hope and pray that those neighbors will come around, but that shouldn't stop us from our duty. Yes, but it shouldn't stop us from our duty to our neighbors. Aisha radiallahu anha quoted the Prophet saying, Jibreel impressed upon me kind treatment towards the neighbor, so much so that I thought he would confer upon him my inheritance, which is, I didn't know this, but this is actually very, very this is actually very serious, because this hadith means is that the Jibreel al-Islam from Allah, of course, told the Prophet ﷺ about good treatment towards the neighbor into such a degree that the Prophet ﷺ thought that Allah would now reveal the laws of inheritance for the neighbor. Meaning that, the Prophet ﷺ thought that we might have to give our inheritance, part of our inheritance share, to the neighbors. Right? So can you imagine the intensity of this? right? That this is how much importance our neighbors take in our lives. But to the point where the Prophet thought we might have to actually give our inheritance. That ruling does not exist. But the Prophet thought he would confer upon him the right of inheritance. Right? That is the importance. That inheritance, our family, our closest family get inheritance. So in this sense, you can almost equate our neighbors to be almost like our closest families. So we need to be, engaging with our neighbors. We need to be, looking out for them, talking to them, greeting them, and, doing things for them. If your neighbors are elderly, doing their weekly shop, or, just checking in on them. It's very, very important that we have a good relationship with our neighbors. Now, there's one thing I did want to talk about, which I actually completely forgot. It's in my notes, but I wanted to, visiting others. It was in this slide that I didn't mention. And I was watching a talk with Nouman Ali Khan just the other day about this, about visiting others. And actually, yes, we physically visit others on a daily basis, but did you know that actually social media, right, is included in this? And let me explain to you how. So, for instance, if you are, we're talking about we're talking about the where I talked about entering a home once sought permission, right? And especially this ayah from Surah Nur to begin with. And for instance, our phones and our tablets or laptops have actually merged into this idea of our personal space. So if somebody is going through your laptop, or if somebody is preying over your shoulder onto your phone, that is also an example of do not enter your houses other than your own houses until you are invited, right? And that's a sort of a modern example to this. And actually, I think as adults, we're okay with that idea. But what often happens is we have our young kids that have this habit of looking over other people's phones, even if they're your nieces or nephews. We need to teach them that this is not part of their private sphere. This is not part of the public sphere. We should not be preying over into somebody's personal space. Right? We should not be preying into somebody's personal elements, sphere of influence. Okay. So social media, messages, phone calls, these are all modern examples of do not enter houses other than your own houses, right? Don't go on looking at your mom's phone if there's any young people listening to this, right? Don't go preying onto, oh, I wonder who came over today. And, for example, I'll give you another really good modern example is the Ring camera, right? Some people have got CCTV in the house, but often sometimes an Alexa, right? And Alexa has this feature where you can actually drop in. And I don't know if you guys knew this about Alexa. I found out when I first got one, is that you got a drop-in feature on Alexa. And if you do not disable the drop-in feature, essentially what you're allowing other Alexa users on your contact list to do is literally drop into your home. And this is, I think, particularly with the Alexa with there's a screen version, and there's Alexa with screen. And that's the one that we've got. And anyone with Alexa can actually, even from their phone, drop into that Alexa and see what's going on inside the house, right? Because it has a camera and everything. And that is extremely, extremely invasive of somebody's privacy. So again, double check all your settings when it comes to that way. But make sure you are the person doing that. Of course, if you're doing that because you've got an elderly grandmother or an elderly person living there and you need to go and check in, you can still do that, but obviously seek prior permission. Do it, alert them and be like, I'm going to be checking in every now and again. Don't just suddenly come into the CCTV camera or come into Alexa or drop in whenever you think is appropriate, because you don't know what that person is doing. You don't know their personal circumstances. So again, personal space also comes into this remit of visiting others in a modern sense, of course. So that was something that I really had to add, because I think with social media nowadays, this is something that's becoming very, very, people are becoming more and more nosy and intrusive. Inshallah. I know that we've only done this for about. Is there anything at this point anyone would like to add? Maybe we can engage in a good conversation.
Sahar? Sorry, Summer. Very quickly, you know, we are going to take like a salah break. So whenever it's appropriate for you, like in 5 minutes or so, we can take a salah break, inshallah.
Actually, I was just thinking about this because I mean, to be honest with you, I'm actually done with my presentation. So if you want, we can close it, or unless there's somebody that wants to add something, we can.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. So that's fine. So if you're done, then yeah, we can finish it
call it.
early
Okay,
then,
so
inshallah.
that's all right, no problem. So I'll
Yes.
just quickly open the floor up, inshallah. If there's anyone that wants to add
Yeah.
anything, raise your hand. We can unmute your mic. As for some reason, the chat feature is not opening on my laptop for whatever reason. I'm not sure why it's not working. But if there's anyone that would like to
No
add to
problem.
any of
Yeah, if they write anything, then I can let you know. And if
Yeah,
not, then
please.
you can use the mic systems. Inshallah.
Yeah, of course. None. To be honest with you, when it comes
nothing
no,
so far.
Alhamdulillah, that's good. Right. No, to be honest with you, when it comes to etiquettes, there is so much. And, you know, when I was given this topic, I just thought there is so much. You don't want it to just be a list format because there is so much to talk about when it comes to etiquettes. But I think in a nutshell, what I would just like to conclude with is courtesy and respect. And if you can show as a Muslim that you're courteous to others and respectful for others, you will receive that back to you. So this is something that you just need to bear in mind, and something that you need to, you know, we need to remember as Muslims that our character speaks louder than words, and our mannerisms speak louder than words. And if our mannerisms are there, then inshallah people will be attracted to that. People will be able to see through, you know, people will be able to see through all your faults and engage with you in that regard. So you know, may Allah allow us to be people of good manners, of good social etiquette, and may Allah guide us all, inshallah, and forgive us for our shortcomings. So, inshallah, I will leave it there. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. خلاص إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Yet again, if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them before we close the time.
Sisters, please feel free to open the mic and shoot out any questions, or if you want to share something that's with regards to these mannerisms, inshallah. The floor is all yours. You can all, you know, contribute in one way or the other, inshallah. I guess no.
Yeah, I guess not. Absolutely no problem, inshallah.
Yeah. So inshallah, next time then. Yeah, inshallah.
Inshallah,
So
definitely.
yeah. Jazakallah khair so much, Summer.
Inshallah, we'll speak to you soon, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Barakallah feek. I think someone. Oh yeah, Jazakallah khair. Great presentation, mashallah. Yeah, so mashallah, great presentation. Very good points to take, and lots, you know, to implement. Lots and lots to implement. Especially, I liked the bit where you were sharing about phone, and you know, like how people are younger people are looking at older people's phone and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think that's going to be a very good takeaway, because you know now it's like the technology age, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So yeah, alhamdulillah. And I'm sure all our audience have taken one thing or the other, inshallah. And yeah, jazakallah khair. So, inshallah, we will be joining in again next week, same time, same place. Usually at this time, we take a break for Salah, but we finished off all our, you know, topic for today. So, inshallah, for next week, we'll meet again, inshallah.
Inshallah,
Okay.
jazakallah khair.
Barakallah. Jazakallah khair, Samar. Okay then, sisters. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.